Hello and welcome to episode 11 of The Wind-Thieved Hat. I've enjoyed every one of the conversations I've had in the making of this series, but I think this is one of my favourites. It's with the sculptor Ivan Black. And so after college, if we sort of from college to now, you've been making work, sculpture.
Well, after college, I did go and look at then degree courses and so on, and what I saw, or what I thought I saw, was some lovely colleges, but a lot more of this kind of almost like a house kind of style of work, and it was all conceptual at the time. Everybody was making conceptual work, and that just wasn't really, I can't say it's not something that interested me, it just wasn't really the way that my mind worked. It wasn't a natural way of expressing myself to me. I didn't kind of have those ideas, and I didn't want to kind of try to force myself to have those ideas or question the worth of the ideas I was having. I just kind of wanted to make stuff without pressure, outside pressure, I suppose. I didn't really care if it was commercial or not, or I wasn't thinking at that stage, I'm going to set the world alight with my sculpture. I just wanted to make things, really. And I have a sort of slightly nuanced relationship with how I define myself as, a creative person. I'm not even sure if I am an artist or only an artist, or even if those definitions mean anything or are important. I just like making things. So we went to look at various colleges, and I tended to find that, they had this seemingly, very conceptual bent in the work that students were making, and so I decided not to apply. And the other thing was that it didn't seem like there was a lot of teaching going on apart from this kind of abstract sort of guidance. And what I really wanted was to be taught how to make things better, how to use tools, how to manipulate materials. I wanted to learn the practical skills, but those seemed to be very undervalued, almost discouraged in the colleges at the time. Maybe if I'd looked a bit harder, I could have found that sort of place. So I decided to just do anything that would teach me skills, and I just figured that I would benefit from becoming skilled. It didn't really matter in what medium, as long as it was sort of using my hands. So I did the carpet restoration, and travelled a bit, went to India for most of a year, which was amazing. And then got a job as an apprentice carpenter, and ended up doing that for 8 years, becoming quite good, kind of graduating to cabinet making and so on. But again, kind of teaching myself a lot, because I worked for a guy within about a year or 2 years. I'd kind of taken over doing the making, and he was, instructing me, but with little kind of nuggets of, of information rather than a structured kind of teaching of this is how you do the things. And that suited me down to the ground, because I was able to, learn things by myself, which I suppose has really always been my great pleasure, is kind of figuring things out for myself. I remember there was a key moment where he was sharpening one of his chisels, and I was quite fascinated by this, and I was watching it, and I said to him, how do you learn how to sharpen a chisel? And he said, well, in the old days, the foreman on site would give the apprentice 20 chisels and say, go away and sharpen these, and he would go away and come back, and then the foreman would say, 19 of these aren't sharp, and give them back, and you'd have to go and do them again, and you'd carry on doing that until you until you mastered it.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, nuts to that, I'm not having that. So I just watched him, really carefully watched what he was doing, and then took away one of the chisels and just copied as closely as I could what I'd seen, and came back, and then I can't even remember if he was amazed or not, but
Let's say he was. It sounds better.
I like to think he was.
Gobsmacked.
Yeah,
his jaw
like
hit the floor.
He was.
Yeah.
Certainly, it was sharp, and that was the thing about watching and repeating, and I don't know what it is that makes a person skilled or not. That's an interesting question, isn't it? I think a lot of it is intent. A lot of it is determination to do something well. If you don't have that determination, then I don't think you'll ever develop the skill, because you'll never care enough. So anyway, did this carpentry and still making sculptures in my own time, but fairly irregularly, and going out a lot and having a great time. And interestingly, for that whole period, I just had totally forgotten about Pembrokeshire. Didn't care. London was the place to be then.
Sure.
I was young, and it was the rave era, and it was just an amazing time of freedom. And it suited me to have this job that I could go and work all week and get paid, and still feel like I was learning stuff, but not have that pressure of having to kind of earn success on my own terms, which is a difficult proposition, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then then we get back round to falling out of love with London then. And I came down to Pembrokeshire for a family friend's funeral and went to one of the childhood beaches, and I'd had some strange times in London. The gloss had come off it, and I remember just lying down on this beach, which was a sort of childhood favourite spot, and just resting my head on the pebbles, and the smell of the nostalgia, and it all just hit me like a train, and I just suddenly realised that I was ready for a different kind of life. So, it was after that I invited my girlfriend at the time to come camping down here a couple of times, and we had a magical time both times. And I remember going back like mahogany coloured, having spent 10 days outdoors, even though it actually drizzled, most of the time, both times, but just from being outside for, all those hours, we'd gone so dark, the pair of us. We looked like a couple of urchins, on the train on the way home, but it felt so free and happy. And so we plotted this move to Pembrokeshire. And before we left, we had a big exhibition. It was a 3-man exhibition, because my brother's a painter.
Okay.
And we had the exhibition in my dad's gallery, and we called it 3 Colours Black. And I showed the collection of work that I'd made in my own time and over a kind of 10-year period. And my dad had, a collection of carpets and my brother's paintings. And it was a great event, really fun. And my stuff sold pretty well. I sold most of the stuff. And just thought, well, it's now or never, really.
Right. How old were you at this point?
29, I guess.
Okay, so you had a good decade of doing the sort of carpentry and mucking around at weekends, and
exactly
time to change gear a bit.
Yeah. And after we left, there was one client who'd been a client of mine when I was doing the carpentry, or a client of my boss, but we'd worked for him a lot, and I'd become friendly with him. And he hadn't managed to make it to the exhibition, and expressed disappointment or whatever. And then one night I'd been not able to sleep and lying in bed ruminating about another sculpture that I'd made, which was one of my kind of few kind of Calder-esque, I would describe, mobiles. But it did this interesting thing where it was kind of a traditional Calder type mobile, where you have a kind of cantilevered arm and then another cantilevered arm, and it formed a sort of spiral. But it did this thing where if you twisted it, it would line up kind of straight, and then when you let go, it would fall back into the spiral shape. And I thought that was really interesting. But I was frustrated by the fact that it was a sort of finite thing, because the more parts you added, the parts had to get longer or the counterweight had to get heavier to balance the rest of the sculpture that was hanging from it. So it had this kind of, it was a self-limiting kind of design, and it was in trying to solve that problem that I had a eureka moment where I suddenly, I thought, okay, I almost quite broke it down in my mind, like, what is it that I'm trying to achieve, which is to, get rid of this limiting factor. And what's the cause of the limiting factor? It's the fact that, each part is counterweighting the other parts. So what's the solution? And then, then it just came to me that the solution is to hang each part from its own centre of gravity. And then I, thought, well, what would that mean? And well, you have to hang them in a chain, and each part is balanced where it intersects the chain. So I had the idea, and I said to this chap who hadn't been able to make it to the exhibition, I said, well, I tell you what, I've got this idea that I really want to try out. I've got this new idea, I haven't made it yet, but I think it's going to be great. Would you be interested if I make it? And he said yes, and that was a good motivation to do it then. Then I tried about 3 different techniques for how to make the chain. I was trying to make each link out of a single piece of wire and then somehow connect them, but that didn't go too well. And so it took about 3 attempts, and then eventually I realised, get the spot welder into play and made the links separately and welded them to a crossbar, and then just put kind of 2 simple elements on each end of each arm. So it was just like a series of crossbars, like a ladder formation almost. And in the centre of each there was a kind of double chain link, and then each one would connect to the next. And so I made about half a dozen of these, and then on the table, and picked it up and twisted it, and it seemed to be doing exactly what I wanted it to do. So then I thought, for fun, right, I'm going to make a whole section of it before I kind of really, I wasn't going to keep adding a piece and checking each time. I decided to make like the whole thing. Yeah. So I made the whole thing and then hung it up. And one of the key things that I'd done was I'd put a slight twist in each link so that when it hung, it would hang in a kind of helix shape, because I was trying to replicate this spiral from the previous sculpture. So then I hung it up from a piece of fishing line and gave it a spin, and then it just did something that was so infinitely more dynamic than what I expected. Just the way that it changed, but it didn't just change, it just kept changing. And I called my girlfriend and was like, Lucy, come and check this out. Yeah. It's crazy. And then we were like, just amazed. It was such a sort of visually exciting thing. Yeah. We just thought, wow, this is something, this is a moment, you could feel it. Yes. And it was a moment for me particularly because it was like the area that had always been dear to my heart in a way, but I'd never been able to find my own, own direction in it. It was suddenly like, this is it. This is how I'm gonna, this is what I'm gonna explore now. No one else is doing this, so this is my doorway into that world. And
that moment, you see the influence of that moment in the work you make today, don't you?
Absolutely. I still use that mechanism. I still use it, and
was it an accident then? Do you think? Or?
No, I don't think so. No. But it was this, it was similar to how I continue to work, which is that I took the element that interested me about this one sculpture and I extrapolated on it, I evolved it into something else. You could say that the dynamism of it was a happy accident in a way. I couldn't know quite how dynamic it would.
I suppose it's like an unexpected outcome of a process, isn't it? Like you were working on that process, but maybe you'd not realised that it was going to do the thing that it did.
No, nor really that it would be, the beginning of a journey. I suppose. I kind of thought, well, here's something of my own, something. And in fact, I didn't immediately think that. My first thought was, well, this is just too obvious to be, unique. I can't be the only person who's thought of this. This is just too, it's too simple. It was so simple, and I showed it then to. In fact, I didn't immediately show it to anyone, because what happened next was we moved to Pembrokeshire, and we moved to.
There's nobody to show it to.
No, which was a good thing. We moved to the north of Pembrokeshire to this little cottage. It was incredibly remote, It makes this place feel like it's in the centre of a big city compared to where we were there, just in the middle of the fields. And the idea then suddenly caused this sort of explosion of possibilities. I'd made this piece, but I just immediately thought, I thought of 5 other things that I could do with it by changing the elements on the ends of the arms, varying the length of the arms, and it was just like every day I had a new idea for what I could do with it, and they were quick to make as well. So I was churning out these sculptures, these different variations, and it was an amazing feeling to be so inspired.
Great.
Yeah, and we were there for 3 months, and I made probably 15 new, ideas.
That must have been really exhilarating too.
It was incredibly exhilarating, and I'm still going back and kind of exploring ideas that I had at that time. I've never had another time like that of such an explosion of creativity. It was just flowing. It's just unbelievable. I just couldn't stop thinking of what to do next with it.
Do you think there were particular conditions to do with your life at the time?
Absolutely. We didn't have any kids, obviously that helped. We didn't have a TV. We had some money in the bank. It was just a unique moment of total creative freedom. There was no pressure. I didn't have to sell the things. There was no distractions. There was no stress. It was just fun, and
sounds idyllic.
It was, and I've had moments since then of creative breakthroughs that have also opened up, whole new avenues to explore. But it's always been within the much more complicated reality of being a parent and having a mortgage and a career and So after that, we brought the sculptures to London and showed them to some people we knew, including one of my friend's dad was a Kinetic sculptor, Peter Logan, who I really admired and looked up to, and he introduced us to some people, and then next thing you know, it looked like everything was going to take off in a big way. But life is more complicated than that, isn't it? And I had a sculpture in an exhibition organised by the Cass Foundation that was in the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in Venice. And we got married, and then 2 weeks later I broke my leg, which was very poor timing, and ended up going to Venice with my leg in this horrible kind of scaffolding contraption called an external fixator.
Right. Kinetic sculpture.
Almost became an embodiment of. I almost turned into a wire sculpture.
Yeah.
And somebody saw the sculpture and asked if I could make one that was 7.5 meters tall for a stairwell in his house. And I said, I don't see why not, but I've never attempted anything like that, so I'm not going to say definitively that I can do it, but I'd love to try.
Yeah.
And he was willing to take the punt, and I made this sculpture, and it was just, it's just installed it and set it going, and it was just amazing. It was, it was a triumph. It was. Probably still remains one of the best things I've ever made.
Wow.
And he loved it, and he was a really serious collector. And his house is full of amazing works, from old masters to Picassos and Pizarros and Bonnard, and So I suddenly felt like I'd been accepted into this world.
Yeah.
And I was talking to galleries, and there was a big New York gallery came over to see this sculpture in the house, and it was a sort of the father who had represented George Rickey, who is a famous kinetic artist who I really admire. And he really liked it, to the point that he sent his son, who is now his partner in the business, to also come and see this and a few other things that I had made. And it was sort of poised, like if they say yes, then it's, we're away. But they said, the son, I think, vetoed it.
Oh no.
Yeah. And that was quite a blow.
Yeah.
And then having had this kind of great flurry of early success, reality kind of crept in, which is that it's actually really, really difficult to do, and really difficult to do anything different as well, and the galleries are brutal places, and you get knocked back a lot, and
So how did you deal with the, you were sort of surfing a wave, it sounds like, at that point in your life, and then when the sort of the wave broke on the beach?
Yeah. I don't think, not amazingly well, I don't think. I think I kind of retreated into my shell creatively a bit, and I can kind of see times when there were setbacks, when my work would suffer, I think, because I would, I'm not the most naturally confident person, so, I couldn't just shrug it off. It impacted on what I was making. And the kind of outpouring of creativity, the time when it had been so easy, sort of ground to a halt a bit. And but I was still selling stuff, and we were supporting ourselves from it. It's just that we were poor all the time. We were broke.
Yeah.
And we were having kids, and it wasn't the only thing in my life, but it was still how I was trying to earn money, and it was very, very difficult at times. And I carried on trying to get in the galleries and stuff like that, and just had some really difficult experiences, and eventually I just stopped trying, just decided to do it in a different way. I remember one of the worst things was going into a gallery. I approached a guy who I had met before at an art fair, and showed him a video of a new sculpture that I'd made, which I was really excited about. It was another evolution from the chain, but it was kind of, in a way, the genesis of square wave. I called it Nautilus, and it's another one that's been widely shared on Instagram now. And I showed him the little video of it moving, and he really liked it. I knew he showed some kinetic art in his gallery. This is the Beaux-Arts gallery in Cork Street. And he said, why don't you come in and we'll have a meeting? And I was really excited, and so I thought I'd take the sculpture and show it to him, and brought it into the gallery, and went into his office or whatever, and opened the box and took out the sculpture and showed it to him, and he was like, oh, but I've already seen that. And then I just showed him the video on the little screen of my phone, and I thought, oh well, I thought it was a really different thing, a different thing to see it in real life than to see the video.
Sure.
We chatted a bit. I showed him pictures of other things, and but ultimately they already had a kinetic artist, and who was Daniel Chadwick, son of Lynn Chadwick, who I'm very friendly with. And I think they thought that it was probably just, they didn't need another one. And then I was packing up my work, and this junior gallery girl just sort of absent-mindedly said to me, well, the thing about your stuff is, is it art or is it craft? Which was a brutal thing to say to somebody who has brought their piece of work into an art gallery. Obviously I thought it was art, but in fact I don't really know if I did think it was art or whether that's important. And I said to her, I'm not really clear about the definition between the two, because I've always kind of thought that in a way. Where's the craft been sucked out of art? It wasn't always that way, You know, it was always a central part of creativity, was your ability to actually make stuff beautifully or paint beautifully. And I remember telling my client who had the huge sculpture in his house about it, and he was outraged. You know, he said she should be sacked. Yeah, and that was the end of my attempts to get into galleries anyway.
Have you resolved that sort of relationship then? Because it's interesting, isn't it, that you know your work is art, and it's in galleries. I suppose work in galleries becomes art, but at the same time you've got the lighting studio, which is selling lights that can be used in a commercial or a domestic setting. Yeah,
I guess I just don't really like to put limitations on what I'm doing, and I think that the fascination, maybe it's something we haven't really touched on yet, is, you know, why kinetic art? You know, what is it about kinetic art? And I ask myself that question. I've always enjoyed making things in lots of ways, you know, and I think there's lots of directions I could have possibly ended up going in. You know, I like making figurative art, and I like wood carving, I like working with clay, and, you know, but there's something unique about kinetic art, which is that it's a sort of multidiscipline. I think it's like a multidiscipline area to explore, because it has elements of invention and craft and art and design, and all kind of mixed together in one medium, if you like. So I think that was what set it apart for me, that it would maintain my interest, because it wasn't one thing, it was many, you know.
Yes. And as we've discovered during the course of our conversation, you've always seemed to have had quite a clear sense of the kind of work you want to make, and what you want to be spending your time doing.
Well, that's another interesting, that was quite a conscious thing, actually, because I have always liked making things, and probably if there hadn't been a prerogative to try to make a career out of it, I wouldn't have worried about sticking to one discipline. But so it was kind of a conscious decision. Like I thought, and maybe rightly as it's turned out, that, you know, to achieve success, that I would need some kind of identity, and that I would need to kind of work within. I wanted to kind of create a body of work that would be recognisably mine, if you like, that would be, you know, that people would be able to, you know, identify my work, that it would, you know, come under a sort of, I don't quite know how to...
So it felt coherent as a
exactly.
body of work.
Yeah, like a coherent, body of work, exactly. And that was, a very conscious decision, Stick to this, make it, you know, as good as you can, make it coherent, and build up a body of work. So that's what I did, and at times I've questioned the wisdom of that when I've kind of reached what felt like kind of creative dead ends. You know, there have been times when I've thought, I've explored everything. I've explored every avenue of this, and I can't actually think of now where else to take it. And it is a difficult career path, isn't it? There's been numerous occasions when I've thought, I want to do something else now. This is too hard. I've had enough. I want to just do something. There must be an easier way to make money.
Is it your main source of income then?
It's our only source of income,
as a family?
That and tax credits probably saved our lives. If it hadn't been for tax credits, it'd probably be fitting kitchens now.
Right. And thank the government for some things.
I'm very eternally grateful for that. But things have turned around a lot, in the last few years. Since exhibiting in Australia and
so I got there's a clip of you talking about Golden Section on the beach in Cottesloe, and it's funny, it's only a short clip, but you sort of get a sense of relief from you
That's interesting.
At that moment,
Yeah.
I sort of had a sense watching it that was a big event for you.
It was a huge event, yeah. It's interesting you pick up on that, yeah. Because, like I say, it has been very challenging at times. I'm sure I would not be the only artist to say that. And, yeah, sometimes it's really felt like I've been swimming against the tide, you know. So to have that endorsement. I remember when I was interviewed immediately after, it was announced that the sculpture had been selected for the acquisition prize, which is where the borough of Cottesloe acquires one of the sculptures from the exhibition. I think there was 79 sculptures in the exhibition, so for my piece to be chosen was quite a big thing. And when they announced the prize, I had to go up onto the podium and talk, have a sort of acceptance speech. It was quite comical. And one of the first things that came to mind, I just said, you know, it's been a long journey to get to this point. And then, you know, I immediately thought, in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Because not only was I on the other side of the world, but, you know, just to have not given up for that long, you know, sometimes seemingly against insurmountable odds. You know?
Yes.
So it really felt like an endorsement or a justification for all of that, what I'd put my family through as well, of you know, being broke and being down at times. And
sure, I think it's the it's sort of the untold story of most artists' lives, isn't it? I think unless you are actually trying to make work and make a living by it, or live with somebody who does, you don't really appreciate, you know, the wilderness that people can spend a lot of time in, and it requires quite strong reserves, doesn't it?
It's brutal. It's brutal, and I think, you know, the prerogative to keep earning money to feed the family.